There are moments in life when something shifts quietly inside you, and you can't fully explain why. Nothing dramatic has happened on the surface. The world outside still looks mostly the same. The same streets, the same conversations, the same routines you've walked through hundreds of times before. But internally, something feels different. It might show up as a subtle awareness when you're sitting alone with your thoughts, or a strange sense that the way you used to see the world no longer fits as comfortably as it once did. And sometimes, what's even more confusing is that you didn't go looking for this change. It simply appeared over time, like a slow sunrise you didn't notice until the sky was already bright. You might find yourself reflecting more deeply than you used to. Conversations that once felt normal may now feel shallow. Environments that once energized you may now feel draining. And if that experience sounds familiar, then this message might resonate with where you are right now. Because there is a very real moment in personal growth when people begin noticing that their internal world is evolving faster than their external environment. And that can create a strange feeling. Not loneliness exactly, not confusion exactly, something in between. It's the feeling of realizing that the person you're becoming is slightly different from the version of yourself that the world around you still expects. Many people experience this stage quietly. They don't talk about it much. They don't always know how to explain it. But internally, they know something is happening. And if you've been feeling that subtle shift lately, it might simply mean you've reached a point where your awareness is expanding. Not in a mystical way, in a human way, a thoughtful way, the kind of growth that often happens after someone spends time reflecting on their experiences, their mistakes, their patterns, and the direction they want their life to move in. Because real change rarely arrives as a loud announcement. Most of the time, it shows up quietly through small realizations. You begin noticing what drains your energy. You begin noticing what actually matters to you. And perhaps most importantly, you begin noticing the difference between who you used to be and who you are slowly becoming. That realization alone can change everything. Not instantly, but gradually. And if you've been sensing that something inside you is evolving lately, there are a few deeper experiences that often accompany this stage of growth. Let's talk about them. When your old environment starts feeling different, one of the earliest signs of internal growth isn't a dramatic life change. It's a change in how familiar things feel. Places you once enjoyed might now feel slightly out of alignment with who you're becoming. This doesn't mean those places are bad. It simply means you're noticing things from a new perspective. Think about the environments people spend time in every day. Workplaces, social circles, online spaces, daily routines. For years, many of those environments operate almost automatically. People go through the motions without questioning much. But when someone begins reflecting more deeply on their life, something interesting happens. Their awareness sharpens. They start noticing the tone of conversations. They start noticing patterns in people's behavior. They start noticing how certain environments affect their mindset. And sometimes the realization is uncomfortable, not because the environment suddenly changed, but because their perspective did. Psychologists often describe this as a shift in personal values becoming more conscious. When someone grows emotionally or mentally, their priorities naturally begin to reorganize. Things that once seemed important may lose their grip. Things that once seemed uninteresting may suddenly become meaningful. And this shift can create a strange experience. You might sit in a familiar place and suddenly feel like you're observing it from the outside, almost like you're noticing details that were invisible before. It could be the tone of a conversation. It could be the negativity that surrounds certain discussions. Or it could simply be the feeling that your mind is now drawn toward deeper subjects than before. This doesn't make anyone better or worse than others. It simply reflects growth. Just like someone who develops a new interest in reading, learning, or self-reflection. Their environment may stay the same for a while, but their internal world begins expanding beyond it. And that gap between internal growth and external surroundings is something many people quietly navigate. At first, it can feel confusing. You may ask yourself why things feel different even though nothing has visibly changed. But over time, the answer becomes clearer. It's not the environment that shifted. It's you, the quiet phase of reevaluating your life. Another experience that often follows internal growth is a period of deep reevaluation. This phase doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. In fact, most people around you may not notice anything at all. But internally, your mind may be asking questions it never asked before. Questions about direction, questions about purpose, questions about what truly brings meaning into your life. For many people, this stage begins after a period of reflection. Maybe life slowed down for a moment. Maybe certain experiences forced you to think more deeply about your choices. Or maybe you simply reached a point where repeating the same patterns no longer felt satisfying. When this happens, people often begin reviewing their lives almost like someone looking through old chapters of a book. They think about the decisions they made in the past, the habits they developed, the influences that shaped their thinking. And instead of judging themselves harshly, many begin observing those experiences with curiosity. They start asking questions like, why did I believe certain things for so long? Why did I stay in situations that didn't help me grow? Why did I ignore certain instincts I had earlier in life? These questions are not signs of regret. They are signs of awareness. Because when someone starts examining their life honestly, they are usually preparing for a new level of personal responsibility. They begin realizing that the direction of their life is not determined by chance alone. It's shaped by daily decisions, small habits, and the willingness to change course when necessary. This stage can feel intense at times, not because it's negative, but because clarity has a way of bringing buried thoughts to the surface. And when that happens, people often experience a powerful internal shift. They stop living entirely on autopilot. They begin thinking about the type of person they want to become moving forward, not based on external pressure, but based on their own values. And that realization often marks the beginning of a much deeper transformation. Because once someone starts consciously shaping their mindset, their identity gradually evolves along with it. The old version of themselves doesn't disappear overnight. But step by step, something new begins taking form. And that process leads to the next experience many people encounter during personal awakening. A subtle but noticeable change in how they relate to other people. There are certain moments in life that don't arrive with noise, announcements, or dramatic turning points. Instead, they appear quietly, almost subtly. You may be going through an ordinary day, driving somewhere, walking outside, or simply sitting with your thoughts, when you notice that something inside you feels different. It's not panic. It's not excitement. It's something more reflective than that. It's the sense that the way you view your life is slowly shifting. You might start noticing patterns that you never paid attention to before. Conversations that once felt normal may suddenly feel repetitive. Situations that once seemed important may begin losing their grip on your attention. And the strange part is that nothing around you necessarily changed overnight. The same people are still there. The same routines still exist. The same world is moving at the same pace. But your perspective has begun evolving. For many people, this stage of life can feel difficult to explain to others. It's not always visible from the outside. In fact, most of the time, the people around you may not notice anything different at all. But internally, there's a quiet awareness building. You start thinking more deeply about where your time goes. You start paying attention to the way certain environments affect your energy. You begin asking questions about the direction your life is moving in. And these questions don't come from frustration, they come from awareness. Because growth often begins the moment someone becomes honest with themselves about what they truly want their life to feel like. Not what others expect, not what social pressure suggests, but what genuinely aligns with their own sense of purpose and clarity. For some people, this realization arrives slowly over years. For others, it appears during a particular season of reflection where they begin noticing that their identity is evolving. And if you've been experiencing something like this recently, you're not alone. Many people reach a point where they start realizing that the person they used to be is gradually being replaced by someone more thoughtful, more aware, and more intentional about life. But this transformation rarely feels dramatic at first. It feels quiet, and it usually begins with small changes in how you experience the world around you. One of the first places where this shift becomes noticeable is in your environment, when familiar places start feeling different. There's an interesting moment during personal growth when the places you've known for years begin to feel slightly different. It's not that those places have changed. The buildings are the same. The routines are the same. The people are often the same. But your perception has evolved. You may walk into a space that once felt completely normal and suddenly notice details you overlooked before. The tone of conversations, the emotional atmosphere, the patterns that repeat themselves day after day. This doesn't mean you suddenly dislike everything around you. What it means is that your awareness has expanded. When someone begins reflecting more deeply on their life, they naturally start observing the environments they spend time in. Instead of moving through them automatically, they become more conscious of how those environments affect their mindset. Psychologists often describe this as a shift from passive living to conscious living. In the passive stage, people move through routines without questioning much. They follow habits that were formed years earlier. Their daily patterns operate almost like background programming. But once someone begins paying attention to their inner world, those patterns become more visible. They start noticing how certain conversations drain their energy. They start noticing which environments encourage growth and which ones encourage stagnation. And this awareness can feel surprising at first, because the same environment that once felt comfortable might now feel limiting. Again, this isn't about judging anyone around you. It's simply about recognizing that your mindset is evolving. Just like someone who begins learning a new skill eventually starts noticing things they never saw before. Their perspective changes because their awareness grows. And the same thing happens during personal development. As your thinking deepens, your relationship with your surroundings naturally begins to shift. You may find yourself spending more time observing rather than participating in certain patterns. You may become more selective about how you spend your time. And slowly, without forcing anything, your life begins reorganizing around the person you are becoming. But environment is only one part of the transformation. Another change that many people experience during this stage happens internally, in the form of deeper self-reflection. The moment you start questioning old patterns. At some point during personal growth, many people notice a shift in the way they think about their past. Instead of simply moving forward without reflection, they begin looking back at certain decisions, habits, and patterns that shaped their earlier life. This isn't about regret. It's about understanding. You might start asking yourself questions that never seemed important before? Why did I stay in certain situations longer than I should have? Why did I ignore certain instincts in the past? Why did I believe certain things without questioning them? These questions can feel intense, but they are also incredibly valuable, because reflection is one of the most powerful tools for growth. When someone takes time to examine their past with honesty, they gain insight into how their mindset developed over time. They begin recognizing the influences that shape their thinking. Family expectations, social pressure, cultural norms, early experiences. All of these things contribute to the identity people carry into adulthood. But at some point, many individuals begin separating who they truly are from the roles they adopted earlier in life. This process can feel like reorganizing the internal structure of your identity. Beliefs are examined, habits are questioned, old assumptions are reconsidered, and slowly, people begin deciding which parts of their past still align with the person they want to become. This stage often happens quietly. Someone might spend more time thinking alone. They may begin journaling or reflecting during moments of solitude. And while the outside world continues moving at the same speed, their inner world becomes more intentional. They start recognizing that growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens through awareness. Every realization becomes an opportunity to make a new decision. Every insight becomes a chance to adjust direction. And over time, those adjustments begin shaping a new identity. But there is another experience that often appears during this stage of development, something that can feel surprising at first. It's the moment when the nature of your conversations begins to change, when your conversations start shifting. As people grow internally, the topics that interest them often begin evolving as well. Conversations that once felt engaging may begin feeling repetitive. Discussions that revolve around gossip, complaints, or surface-level topics may gradually lose their appeal. Instead, many people find themselves becoming more interested in conversations that explore ideas, perspectives, and personal growth. They may enjoy discussing books, life lessons, psychology, creativity, or meaningful experiences. This shift doesn't happen because someone suddenly believes their interests are more important than anyone else. It happens because their curiosity has expanded. When a person becomes more reflective, their mind naturally gravitates toward deeper subjects. They become fascinated by understanding how people think, why certain patterns exist, and how individuals grow through experience. Sometimes this creates a noticeable gap between them and certain social circles, not because relationships are broken, but because interests evolve. You may notice that some conversations feel energizing, while others feel draining. You might find yourself listening more than speaking in certain environments, observing dynamics that previously went unnoticed. And over time, many people begin seeking out interactions that encourage thoughtful discussion rather than repetitive negativity. This stage can feel slightly isolating at first, but it's also a natural part of growth. When someone's mindset evolves, their social interactions eventually adjust as well. They begin surrounding themselves with people who value reflection, curiosity, and meaningful dialogue. And those connections often create space for the next phase of personal development. Because as conversations shift, another powerful change begins to appear. The role of solitude starts becoming more important. Why solitude starts playing a different role in your life. At some point during personal growth, many people notice that their relationship with solitude begins to change. Earlier in life, being alone might have felt uncomfortable. Silence might have felt awkward. Free time might have immediately been filled with distractions, music, television, social media, or constant conversation. But as awareness grows, something interesting happens. Solitude begins to feel different. Instead of feeling like emptiness, it starts feeling like space. Space to think, space to reflect, space to understand your own mind without the constant noise of outside opinions. This doesn't mean someone suddenly withdraws from the world or stops valuing relationships. It simply means they begin recognizing the value of quiet moments. Moments where they can observe their thoughts clearly. Moments where they can process experiences without rushing to the next distraction. In modern life, people rarely give themselves that opportunity. The world moves quickly, and there is always something competing for attention. Notifications, conversations, responsibilities, expectations. But growth often requires the opposite of constant noise. It requires moments of stillness. Psychologists often describe this as the difference between reaction and reflection. When someone is constantly surrounded by stimulation, their mind tends to react automatically. They respond to situations quickly, often based on habits formed years earlier. But when someone spends time in quiet reflection, they begin noticing those habits more clearly. They start asking questions about why they respond to certain situations the way they do. They begin recognizing emotional triggers. They begin understanding how past experiences shape their current reactions. And through that awareness, something powerful happens. Choice appears. Instead of reacting automatically, they begin responding intentionally. Solitude becomes the environment where that awareness grows. Not because being alone is the goal, but because reflection often requires distance from constant stimulation. Many people who go through this phase notice that they become more comfortable spending time with their own thoughts. They may go for long walks without needing constant entertainment. They may sit quietly and reflect on the day. They may find clarity simply by giving their mind the room to process experiences naturally. And while this change can feel unusual at first, it often leads to one of the most important shifts in personal growth. The shift from reacting to observing. The shift from reacting to observing. Earlier in life, many people move through situations quickly. A comment triggers a reaction. A disagreement triggers frustration. A stressful moment triggers anxiety. These responses often happen automatically, almost like reflexes. But as self-awareness grows, something begins to change. Instead of reacting immediately, people begin observing what's happening internally. They notice their emotional responses as they appear. They notice the thoughts that accompany those emotions. They begin recognizing patterns that once felt invisible. For example, someone might notice that certain conversations consistently trigger defensiveness. Instead of immediately responding, they pause long enough to ask themselves why that reaction appears. Or they might notice that certain environments create tension in their body, while others create a sense of calm. This kind of awareness might seem small, but it represents a major shift in personal development. Because when someone begins observing their internal responses, they gain the ability to change them. They are no longer completely controlled by habits formed in the past. They begin creating space between stimulus and response. That space allows for thoughtful decision-making. Instead of reacting based purely on emotion, they can consider the bigger picture. They can ask themselves questions like, is this situation worth my energy? Is this reaction helping me move forward? What would a calmer response look like right now? Over time, this ability to observe rather than immediately react becomes one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. It leads to stronger emotional stability. It leads to clearer communication. And perhaps most importantly, it leads to greater control over one's own mindset. But this stage of awareness often leads to another realization that many people don't expect. As you begin observing your reactions, you also begin noticing how much your identity has been shaped by past experiences. RECOGNIZING, how your past shaped your thinking. Everyone carries pieces of their past into the present. Childhood experiences, early successes, difficult moments, influential relationships. All of these things contribute to the beliefs people carry about themselves and the world around them. But many individuals move through life without ever examining those beliefs closely. They simply assume their current mindset is permanent. Yet during periods of reflection, something different begins happening. People start noticing how their past experiences influence their reactions, fears, and expectations. For example, someone who grew up in a highly critical environment may realize that they developed a habit of second-guessing themselves. Someone who experienced frequent instability might notice that they constantly prepare for worst-case scenarios, even when situations are stable. These patterns aren't signs of weakness. They are signs of adaptation. The human mind is incredibly good at learning from experience and creating protective strategies. But sometimes those strategies remain active long after the original situation has passed. And when people begin recognizing those patterns, they gain the opportunity to update them. Instead of automatically believing every thought that appears in their mind, they begin questioning whether those thoughts still serve them. They ask themselves, is this belief still accurate? Is this fear based on the present or the past? Is this habit helping me grow or holding me in an outdated version of myself? These questions create the possibility of change. And over time, many people begin replacing old mental patterns with new ones that better reflect the person they are becoming. This process isn't instant. It happens gradually through repeated awareness. But as those internal patterns evolve, something else begins changing as well. The way you see yourself, when your self-image STARTS EVOLVING. One of the most fascinating aspects of personal growth is how quietly identity can shift. For years, many people carry a mental image of who they believe they are. They might see themselves as shy, or impulsive, or overly cautious, or someone who struggles with confidence. These labels often form early in life and become deeply embedded in a person's self-perception. But during periods of reflection and growth, people often begin noticing that these labels no longer fully describe them. They may realize they've developed new strengths, new perspectives, new emotional resilience. Situations that once felt overwhelming may now feel manageable. Challenges that once caused hesitation may now feel like opportunities to learn. And gradually, the old identity begins loosening its grip. This doesn't mean someone becomes a completely different person overnight. Instead, it means they start recognizing that identity is not fixed. It evolves. Every experience adds new layers. Every lesson reshapes perspective. And every moment of awareness expands the understanding of who you are capable of becoming. This realization can feel empowering, but it can also feel unfamiliar. Because when someone's identity begins evolving, their future possibilities expand as well. They start imagining paths they never considered before. They begin thinking about the kind of life they want to build moving forward. And that shift in thinking often leads to the deepest transformation of all. Not just changing habits, but redefining the direction of your life itself. And maybe the most important question to sit with after reflecting on all of this is a simple one. What changes have you started noticing in yourself lately? Growth often happens so gradually that we don't recognize it while it's happening. We only see it when we pause long enough to look back and realize how much our thinking, priorities, and awareness have evolved. So take a moment and think about your own experience. What perspectives have shifted for you recently? What habits or mindsets have you started questioning? And what kind of person do you feel yourself slowly becoming? If any part of this reflection resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the conversation below. Hearing different perspectives can help all of us understand this process of growth a little more clearly. And if you enjoy exploring ideas like this, about awareness, mindset, and the quiet ways people evolve over time, you're welcome to stay connected here. There will always be more conversations like this ahead.